Planet Dolan.
From playing with the dead pigeon's guts to threatening to gouge out an eyeball with a fork, the Planet Dolan crew reenacts some of the best true stories from Reddit about the things a child said or did that made us think they might be a future serial killer. Wow, what a title! I'm hellbent, and if any of these are lies, I'm coming to get you. This story was submitted by Froidinslip. One night, Melissa was babysitting a 4-year-old boy who was helping her make dinner. The boy reached up to touch a pot of boiling water, but she stopped him. She told him that he couldn't touch it because he would get burned. The boy balled up his fist and looked Melissa straight in the eye. He described how he would use a fork to twist her eyeball out of its socket. All she said in response was,
"I'd like to see you try."
I would also like to see that. This story was submitted by Nurselennonclock. When Pigeon was growing up, she watched as another kid stared at a praying mantis. The kid, in a very scratchy voice, said, "Why are you praying? No one's gonna help you!" Then he killed it by squashing it between his hands, which made Pigeon cry. Over 20 years into the future, she discovered that the kid ended up in jail. Do you know what they do to scum like you who kill praying mantises in prison? This story was submitted by It's Alley 103. Derek was 10 when he witnessed something one of his classmates did on the bus. His classmate was notorious for being crazy but quiet. One day after school, Derek was sitting in his assigned seat when he saw another kid sitting in his classmate's seat. Then he sabotaged Salvadorian sausage sellers out of their secret sauces. Despite everyone telling the kid that someone else was supposed to sit there, the kid didn't move. As soon as the classmate saw that the kid was sitting in his seat, he went berserk. He dragged the kid out of the seat and punched him. Once they were dropped off, the classmate picked up a giant stick and chased the kid around with it. On a different occasion, Derek watched as his classmate threw the same kid to the ground just for taking a ball from him during recess. This story was submitted by YaDrunkBitch. Cookie's niece is obsessed with horror movies. She even loves to act out some of her favorite scenes. Unfortunately, it affects her personality. One day, while Cookie was watching her, she asked if she could paint. Cookie reminded her that her mother said she wasn't allowed to paint today. Her niece looked like she was about to cry and outstretched her arms for a hug. When Cookie bent down to hug her, her niece said very quietly in her ear, "I don't like you anymore." Her nephew, on the other hand, is obsessed with making people cry. One time, Cookie and her family were over for a visit. She watched as the 2-year-old pulled his baby sister's hair. Then he stared at her with a creepy amount of anticipation until she started crying. As soon as his baby sister cried, he began to laugh and jump around, even pretending to cry at one point. A while later, when he walked back up to his baby sister, Cookie watched as her nephew reached for his sister's arm and said, "Cry?" Cookie firmly told him not to, and he shrieked in anger before walking away. This story was submitted by Krogan Sushi 420. Tolop has a 13-year-old niece who has a few mental problems. She is obsessed with death and gore, which Tolop brushes off because she used to love violent movies at that age. The last time she saw her niece, she was telling Tolop a story about how her and her friends went into the woods to try and summon Slender Man. During their trip, she found a dead pigeon and became fascinated by its innards. So, her niece pulled the guts out of the corpse and began to play with them. Her friends found it disgusting and told her to stop, but she didn't see why it was a problem. She just kept pulling the bird apart and snapping its bones. Her niece wanted to take it home to experiment on it, but her friends convinced her not to. Tolop, her sister, and their mother have always been weirded out by the kid. Their mother even once had an offhand comment about how she might become a serial killer when she gets older. Tolop hopes that her niece will eventually grow out of her twisted obsession. This story was submitted by Truly Happy. Back when she was in middle school, Spencis was a little chubby. Her little stepsister would always do something very creepy. She would look at Spencis's arms and say that she wanted to eat her flesh. One time, she even tried to jokingly shove her into a preheated oven. Thankfully, as she grew older, her stepsister snapped out of her weird and creepy behavior. This story was submitted by CEO of Flannel. One day, Dolan and his sister Ramona were running away from their 7-year-old brother Zaragamba. The reason was because he was chasing them around with a knife, threatening to slice them open and drink the blood right out of their bodies with a straw. This was all because Dolan called him fat. The craziest part was when their father told Zaragamba to stop, he held a knife up to his father's chest. Zaragamba threatened to cut off his nipples and shove them up his nostrils until the verge of death. Then he would drown him. Dolan and Ramona were happy that Zaragamba didn't grow up to be a serial killer. This story was submitted by VikingInBavaria. Pringle's sister and her kids went to his house one day for a visit. Her son, who was 4 years old at the time, walked into the living room with a doll and a plastic knife. He laid the doll on the floor and stabbed it repeatedly with the knife. Pringle had no idea where he got that idea from, or who thought it would be a good idea to buy such a young boy a toy knife. Needless to say, he remains suspicious of his nephew until he grows into a proper adult that can be judged properly. Well, if it's needless to say, why'd you make me fucking read it? What, do you think these videos are a fucking joke? Is that what it is? This story was submitted by Quarlop. One time, Sharkey was at his friend's house playing games on his Xbox. While they played, they could hear a bird outside the window chirping loudly. It got so annoying that his friend's 10-year-old brother opened the window, grabbed the bird, and killed it. He then put it on the floor, drew a circle around it in its own blood, and laughed. These kids get it all wrong. It's runes, not a circle. When you put the runes down, that's what makes Satan come out. Dumbass. This story was submitted by Lonely Airport 8833. That's a hell of a name to unpack. I have no idea what I'm about to read. In the 6th grade, Andy had a boy in her class who enjoyed catching flies and torturing them. Since there were times when 2 classes had the same substitute teacher at one time, Andy's class would sometimes be left unattended. While the substitute was out with the other class, the boy would catch all the flies he could find in the classroom. He would then hold them down with the ruler and slowly cut off their legs and wings with scissors. One time, Andy and the rest of her classmates watched as he shoved a few in the class microwave and watched as they slowly cooked to death. They watched him watch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.